Okay, I'll talk to you about it after I do this, honey. Trying to do all the things I can to make sure that the live doesn't freeze 3 or 4 times during the live. But if it freezes 3 or 4 times during the live, that is why. I apologize. Life and TikTok seem to be conspiring to pause 5 or 6 times every live for me these days. So if it does pause, oh, that's weird. Why is it only 10 and not 15? If it does pause, I will be right back. If I'm going to leave for any specific reason, I will announce before I leave. Yay, beautiful. I will announce before I leave that I am leaving so that you don't think that I have just disappeared on you. This weirded me out. Okay, so I might be double sending to some people because of the way that just did that. Apologize. I try to send to people because I know a lot of people want it, but I feel like I send to people sometimes who don't want it. So I apologize on that one as well. Thank you. I know. I'm sorry. It was a lot of stuff here for a couple of months, and it wasn't. I mean, in some ways, it affected my trauma, but it was not necessarily my trauma. And yet still it was just a lot. And so I had to it was just too much. I just had to shut down. Like I spent the 2 weeks after I got back from Oklahoma, I just like literally, I haven't really talked to anybody for the last week. And it's only been in the last day or so that I'm actually able to get up and actually function and work and take care of my house and shower and shit like that, just because, it was just such an overwhelming amount of, trying to make sure that everybody else around me was in a safe space and totally okay. And that can at times really be a lot for me. And then of course, like I'm really not trying to like make it about everybody or make it about me either. Like it's other people's hurt and it's other people's pain. And I don't want other people's hurt and pain to be about me. Or to be sent to center myself in other people's hurt and other people's pain, and that in and of itself has its own things. Because then, yeah, well, and I just had an iron infusion, so I think my iron is pretty decent. Absolutely, it's not actually, but it could be. I mean, she's half Neanderthal and half Denisovan, and she was 13 when she died. So, and there's no evidence that she actually gave birth. So I doubt she's my ancestor or anybody else's ancestor, but she's a really, really curious case because she is, again, half Denisovan and half Neanderthal. And being half Denisovan and half Neanderthal means that she's the first that we have found that is a first generation hybrid of 2 different Homo species, 2 different humans, right? And so I'm trying to make sure that this works with, there we go. Being somebody who is of 2 different species, that's absolutely awesome, right? And to give us that evidence of actually being of 2 different species, right? And as a first generation, because we know that this happens, right? And we know that this happens because of the fact that we see DNA from both of these species within us. There's like 280 people in here. So let me really quick go over a couple of things. My name is Sarah. I'm a Wicca. A Wicca is a scientist of an indigenous bent. I am an archaeologist, an anthropologist, a healer, a storyteller, and a historian. I have degrees in a couple of different things, including what I've just listed off. And I'm a disabled war vet. I don't work in that because I can't deal with that. And so what I do is give information because I believe that knowledge shouldn't be gatekept behind a $40,000 a year paywall and language and different things that people can't I will read paragraphs, whole paragraphs. I have a degree in medicine and a degree in archaeology. These are science degrees. I will read whole paragraphs. I am extremely verbose. You won't typically hear it on here because I try not to use the large $5 words every single time. I'm extremely verbose. I'll take a huge paragraph and not be able to parse it out without looking up 3 or 4 different words. So gate kept by language that's difficult for people, even with advanced degrees, to be able to parse out and understand what is going on within the context of the information. And because I believe that language or that knowledge shouldn't be gate kept, I come on here to teach it. I am just dropping little penguin pebbles, just giving little bits of information on different things that I've learned and understood and have a concept of. I in no way know everything. I'm not trying to know everything. I don't think anybody can know everything. So if I'm wrong, you're more than welcome to tell me I'm wrong. I ask that instead of just telling me I'm a liar, or instead of just saying words that are really shitty and rude, that and my dog needs to go out. YouTube, there's nobody there. So instead of just saying, instead of just saying things like, oh, Grant, hold on. Grant. One second. Bar. So sorry about all of that. Let me backtrack. Oh, instead of saying that I'm a liar or telling me that I'm wrong, just give me information like that's incorrect because this information, that's incorrect because this information, that's not correct anymore. That's not the truth anymore. Just be nice and kind about it. I'm doing this as a kindness. I expect kindness in return. We lack kindness in our world, and we lack kindness in our world because those who are trying to control you and rob you of everything you have give you the idea that being kind to other people is a problem. Because if we are kind to other people, if we look at other people and we see other people as what they are, our neighbors, our community, the people that we're supposed to love and take care of, and we see them, if you see your neighbor in the kind of light, then you're less likely to vote. You're less likely to vote in fear. You're less likely to allow those who are in control and who are exploiting you to do so. So we lack kindness in this world. It's a taught thing that we lack kindness in this world. So I'm giving kindness. I ask for kindness in return. I'm not saying don't tell me I'm wrong. I might be wrong. Just do it kindly. That goes along with the fact that I'm going to teach you how race does not exist. This is a theory that was created to justify white Europeans' atrocity, to try and give reasoning for something when the Bible went away. And that theory has been debunked by a multicultural panel of scientists who have done what's called the Whole Genome Project, right? And these are all things that you can either find in my website as sources, or you can find it by Googling yourself. And since the theory of race has been debunked, I don't deal with racism in my chat very well. Cultural and ethnicity still exist 100%. There is a huge importance in culture and ethnicity, especially for many, many, many people. And we need to make that importance understood, and we need to ensure that we uphold that importance. Race, meaning your phenotype, indicates your genotype, or meaning that what your skin color is indicates your level of intelligence, your level of pain, your level of ability, your level of function, has been debunked. Race does not exist. In fact, we now know that even things like Black Americans are more inclined to have heart problems, have more to do with redlining than with being of African descent. Or things like Native Americans have a higher propensity for diabetes, has more to do with force-feeding processed food in food deserts on reservations than it has to do with the genetics of Native Americans. So, when we are looking at this, we ask that you understand that the theory of race has been debunked, and we'll talk more about that. So I don't want to deal with your racism. You won't like my response. You won't like my mod's response. The other thing is, I don't deal with phobias based on gender and desire or religion. I don't want to hear about your God. I think he's a toxic creep. Keep him out of my chat. He might get mentioned a couple of times as we've talked about the things his followers have done, but I don't want to deal with him. And I certainly don't want to deal with your anti-Semitism or your Islamophobia in my chat. Keep both of those out. Take them somewhere else, or just get rid of them altogether. The other thing is phobias based on gender and desire. Gender is my perception of self. That's what the word gender means. Biologically, sexes come in three: male, female, and intersex. 2% of the population is intersex. That means that they might have chromosomes from both sexes, but only produce, like they might have the chromosomes of a male, but they have female external organs, or they have a mixture of the organs, right? So intersex exists at 2% of the population. Do you know what else is also 2%, though a different 2% of the population? Redheads and green-eyed people. These are both also 2% of the population, different 2%, right? But shows you just how much there is intersex, which is the third biological sex, within our population. And just how important it is not to base your phobias based on my perception of self, right? Not to try and tell somebody else what their perception of their own body is, because how the heck would you know what's going on inside my body, right? And when we come to phobias based on desire, you know what? This idea that male and female are supposed to only be with each other is extremely new. Just like the idea that there are only two biological sexes is extremely new. And it really comes, again, with a method of control, with the need to control. And as long as you feel that you need to control other people, instead of understanding that we are not to be controlled, that's not what the right to life, that's not what autonomy means, right? We're not supposed to have our concepts on our bodies or personal selves controlled by somebody else. And that method of control is really just to keep certain people in power so that they can rob you blind. The sooner you realize that, the better you're going to be in this world, right? So keeping your phobias based on gender or desire or religion out of my chat and keeping your racism out of my chat is really important to me. Computer, stop. My mods will work really hard to keep everything in check. If it goes out of check, I'll turn off comments for a while. If my mods mute you and you feel that you didn't need to be muted, that happens. You can come to me and talk to me about it. Sometimes my mods are wrong. Sometimes you didn't understand, right? And that's understandable on both sides too, right? If it gets out of check, I'll turn off comments. If I turn off comments, I'll turn comments back on for 10, 15 minutes, just so everybody gets the chance to ask questions. Questions are important when we're learning. My website, it only gives you a couple of sources. It might only give you one article so that you can go and do deeper research, because when we're doing our own quest, if we're looking for knowledge on our own, if we're digging into something ourselves, we learn more about it. We understand it more. Our desire to understand it gives us the ability to understand it quite a bit more. And so I ask, or and so I'm giving you these things so that you can dive in a little bit deeper. So you have a platform to start from, right? So that you have a space to go from. So I will want to turn the comments back on just so you can ask questions if I turn the comments off. The other thing is lately TikTok keeps pausing my lives or causing the interaction with, if it does, I'll be back. If I'm going to leave, I'll tell you I'm going to leave. If it pauses it, I'll be back. I don't, as I was explaining in the very beginning, I'm a disabled war vet. I don't have the capacity to leave my house many days. So this is how I do that, right? I teach here. And I have all of the things that I would need to teach somewhere else, but working for other people in a capitalistic society doesn't work for my brain. I'm not asking anything from you. I don't ask anything from anybody in here. If you want to subscribe, that's fine. If you want to do all of this, if you want to give me, I don't care. That's not why I'm here. I'm not here for your money. I'm not here for your cash. I'm here because I can't leave my house because this world's too fucked up and I know it's wrong. And I know that there's a better way. And I know that we were doing that way for 290,000 years. And I know that this way is all just to keep you in check. And that's why I'm here, right? Well, if we're going to use her for something, might as well use her for that. No, this is Denny. Again, Denny is about 90,000 years ago from the Denisovan cave. She is half Denisovan and half Neanderthal. Her mother was Neanderthal and her father was Denisovan. Fun fact, we still don't have a Neanderthal Y DNA. The 4 male Neanderthals that we have had Denisovan Y DNA, or they had Homo sapien Y DNA. So, or at least the Y chromosome, not DNA from the father's line. So Denny is half Neanderthal and half Denisovan. She was about 13 years old when she died, and we know about her from a little tiny piece of thigh bone from Denisova Cave. Denisova Cave is layers and layers and layers of hundreds of thousands of years of human habitation, going from Neanderthal to Denisovan to Homo sapiens, and mixed, intertwined with all of that in several different periods of time. And those thousands of fragments of bone that we have are all very, very, very small. So the age in the picture in the reconstruction, first of all, again, she was a 2-inch piece of thigh bone. You got to reconstruct off the DNA itself on that. And so the DNA reconstruction itself, there's a new system of reconstruction out of one of the Max Planck institutes in Europe that actually can take and extrapolate from the DNA what somebody looked like. And we've understood this a little bit over the course. Like, we know that Cheddar Man had dark skin and blue eyes, right? We know now that Otzi had skin that is darker brown, and he also had brown eyes, even though he was found in the Swiss Alps, and even though some of his descendants are in Sweden, right? We know these things now from extrapolation from DNA. So the DNA extrapolation techniques have gotten better and better. And this is an extrapolation from her DNA. We also know now that there are oils on our skin and the way that our skin sheds that we know about. They created a thicker kind of layer over our skin a few thousand years ago, up to like 30,000, 40,000 years ago. Maybe it was 20 to 30,000. They would create a very a thick, actually, layer between the oils and the way that our skin sheds off little particles, which you've known about your whole life, right? When I have oily skin, or, you can see these little flakes of my skin, or damn, I'm a little ashy, right? Like there's flakes of your skin everywhere, right? So those oils and those flakes would combine, and they create this kind of thick layer over the skin that makes you look not only older, like Denny, but also gives you the ability to protect yourself from the sun and from the environment in a much better way at a time when you didn't have things like sunscreen or a parasol to shade you, right? And so when we look at this, we see that many of our older hominin finds, we have pause. I'll be right back. I apologize. As I said, this comes through, and this happens lately with TikTok. I will again come back when it does it. Though if we do it 3 or 4 times, I'll probably end up, restarting live just so that it's not like off the feed, because it will tend to like get really weird with the feed. So when we look at this, we can see that these different particles on the skin are actually really protective for the skin in a time when we needed that protection for the skin, right? So a lot of our finds, we extrapolate them as having those particles and having this layer of a layer of, I guess it would just be a layer of oil and skin. I mean, what else am I going to call it? This thicker layer of stuff on their skin actually would make them look older. And so we're positing that when we're looking at these days. So that's why she does look older than 13, but she was 13. Also, this is just an artist reconstruction. This is not my favorite type of artist reconstruction. I, by the way, have figured out, I think, a new way to do something. So let me show you my favorite artist reconstructions like this. Oh, wait a minute. One more second. Oh, that's fine. No. Sorry. I'm slow on the computer. I am a Gen X. I know I don't look like it, but I am absolutely a Gen X. And I grew up without having any technology in my house for the first several years. And so for me, I am not really good with, and I want to see how this is going to work. I have fixed up something where I can actually go and show you guys. My face in huge form. Ha ha ha. I rigged up a whiteboard, kind of, sort of. I mean, it's not the best whiteboard, but ha ha ha. This is actually my favorite people who do reconstruction. I don't know if it will. Oh, it will. Ha ha ha. This is Kinnis and Kinnis, and you can get to them from my site, from my NWITA.org, because they're underneath the tools that I use, because I typically use one of these images. Actually, they don't have any images of Denny, but Kinnis and Kinnis is my favorite reconstructor. They actually do some beautiful, beautiful, oh, my screen went blank. Hold on, I wasn't touching it enough. They actually do, this is my favorite image right here. This is the one that I use typically for my background when I'm talking about Homo erectus, per request from some people who find her to be the most beautiful. And I absolutely, what I love about Kinnis and Kinnis, and because this is not a free speech space, this is my space. Your house isn't free speech. My house isn't free speech. You're sitting in my living room. We're coming from my living room. This is my space. It's not a free speech space. And free speech never comes without consequences. You just think that free speech is supposed to come without consequences. But the fact of the matter is that free speech never comes without consequences. And you thinking that you can use the idea of, oh my God, free speech means I can be an asshole is your issue, not mine or my mods. I did not make it through free speech. If you think that anybody in this country has the rights that you think that they have, I would point out Roe v. Wade. I have no bodily autonomy. And if you think you have bodily autonomy, you've done lost your mind and haven't had your eyes open to what's going on around you. Not on me. That's your check yourself. Free speech says you can say what you want. It does not mean that there are no consequences for what you say. And free speech doesn't include my house. This is my house, my boundaries, my rules. Period. Doesn't go any further than that and doesn't need any more than that. You've never known communism. You've known capitalism wrapped up in the term communism. Communism doesn't exploit and it has no leaders. True community, true communion, working as a community does not exploit anybody and it has no leaders. What you have seen is capitalism wrapped up in communism. I didn't mention you. I didn't say nobody's name. I didn't even say what you said. I just responded to it. And again, free speech does not have a lack of consequences. How? Use your brain. Use your brain. Everything in this world has a consequence and a responsibility. And free speech absolutely does not come with a lack of consequence. If you walk up to somebody and call them a slur and they hit you, that's well within their right. That's a consequence of your free speech. Grow up and be an adult, because adult comes with understanding that nothing comes without a consequence, and no right comes without responsibility, and every action has a reaction. And again, my home does not include free speech that's rude. I get to set the rules in my space. If you want to set the rules, go lie yourself. It only takes 1,000 followers. Okay? So Kinnis and Kinnis is actually one of my favorite ways to get images because of the fact that Kinnis and Kinnis actually shows humans, right? The humanity in them. And while I love Denny and I love the story of Denny, this image of Denny is not my favorite image. It's the only image I have of Denny, though. And so I utilize this image of Denny. And that's why she looks in the way that she looks. And again, it's an extrapolation from the DNA that they have, right, from the available resources that they have to give us an understanding of this human being. Actually, the number of cats has changed recently. But I did get a Crazy Cat Lady starter pack a few years ago. I ended up having to find new homes for them, unfortunately. But and I got my Crazy Cat Lady starter pack in long hairs, because everybody should get a Crazy Cat Lady starter pack in long hair. If you're going to do it right, right? Currently, we have like a kitten. We had a lot of recent changes, as I had said at the beginning of the live, which is why I haven't been here for a couple weeks. And the recent changes included a child moving back into the home, and that child brought animals with them. And that made us have too many animals. And so I had to shift out some of the animals that we had. So I miss my babies, but I love my baby and they deserve better, right? So let's get on to kind of the subject, kind of the concepts. We've talked just a little bit on that with Denny, because Denny is on the wall, right? But there's a lot more information, even to Denny herself, right? Denny shows us 2 of the 7 cousin species that we lived alongside of, that are all descendants of Homo erectus, right? Now, Homo erectus is about 2 million years ago, and Homo erectus makes it across the globe. We have sites here in North America, what is actually Turtle Island. The Cerruti Mastodon site is a Homo erectus descendant site that is not Homo sapien at 130,000 years ago here in Turtle Island. We have a couple of sites in Mexico that actually predate the Cerruti Mastodon site. And so we actually have a few sites here that predate sapiens here and show Homo erectus making it here. We also know that Homo erectus made it to Australia because of the Moy Hill site in Australia that's 120,000 years old. Now, we do know that Indigenous Australians are the oldest continued population outside of Africa. They are 70,000 years old, and they have had that continued culture and genealogy in that space for 70,000 years. And we do have evidence of that without a doubt. We also know that really the next oldest, with the latest information that we have, is actually Turtle Island and Abya, because we know that they're here at 54,000 years ago. And so that gives us a knowledge. And then, of course, after 54,000 years ago, we start to see Asia populated, and we start to see Europe populated, because until then, most of these spaces were still really ice-filled and really cold, right? So Homo erectus is our grandparent to me. That's our grandmother or grandfather to me. And so these 7 species that live alongside us, that we intermix with, that we have DNA from, and that we got understandings of space from, right? And in some instances, even not just a mental understanding of the space around, but genetics from the Denisovans give Tibetans the ability to live in a low oxygenated environment, as well as people in the islands of the South Pacific, and an ability to dive further and longer than anybody else on the planet because of the low oxygenated environment genealogy or genes that they get from Denisovan, right? So not only do these give us an understanding of the space that we're moving into, or these other communities give us an understanding of the space that we're moving into, they also give us genetics in many cases. Now, currently, we know of 7 in the fossil record, and these 7 in the fossil record, 1 is within the last 6 months. Let me go over them in order of how we found them. The first one we found was Neanderthal, and we found Neanderthal in 1856, 1855. Neanderthal. Neander is the name of the tal or valley in which Neanderthal was found. This is how we name our other species as we find them. And at the finding of Homo neanderthal, we're in a time period where we're starting to understand the concept of evolution, of the concept of a science of evolution, rather than biblical concept as our origin, right? We're starting to go from creationism to evolution, right? And in this, we don't actually understand Neanderthal as being a whole different species first. We don't even understand them as being, like we think of them as being a modern human whose skull is deformed from disease process for about the first 10 years after we find Homo neanderthal. And as such, his skull gets passed around. That first skull has been passed around so many times it was lost really early on. We did find we have a whole new species. And as we start to work with this, this idea of the theory of evolution and the idea of the theory of eugenics and the idea of the theory of race all come together and all interact and work with each other at the same time as they are evolving as theories. And the way that these theories interact and evolve in a European dominated environment is that they interact and evolve in a way to justify the atrocities that Europeans have been committing against other groups of humans before they could justify it with their Bible. Their Bible justified it in many ways for them. They could twist passages to state that certain people were marked by God, and because they were marked by God, that mark supposedly being darker of skin, that mark meant that they were somehow able to be enslaved or to be genocided or to be harmed in a myriad of ways that we see, especially here within the United States, though absolutely around the world and definitely in Europe at this time, people of darker skin being traumatized and being harmed by people of lighter skin, right? And absolutely, at times it was because they wanted organs. That's why the theory of race states that people who are darker of skin do not feel pain. If you do not know about the godfather or the grandfather of or father of gynecology, you should. We are talking about a white man who used his enslaved women to perform hysterectomies without any medication. So this is this period of time. This is a period of time where the justification of atrocities that are being committed needs a double down. And so we see that the theory of evolution and the theory of eugenics and the theory of race all get created together. And they get created together in a way that evolution starts to show Neanderthal as being like an older form of us. And it starts to equate Neanderthal with being more primitive. And you will see that many of the older pictures, absolutely, we're talking about a debunked theory, absolutely. And there are several different theories of evolution, right? Just like there are several different theories of gravity. Theories are not laws. Science is a good one to point out here. Science is I observe in nature. I use that observation to predict what that observation might mean, or I use that observation to form a hypothesis or an idea of what that is. And then I use a prediction of what that might mean. And then I test. And if that test proves false, then I go back to my hypothesis. And if that test proves true, I have a theory, right? And as long as that test is proving true, I continue to have a theory. This is why when you see a scientist who won't publish their work, they're not accepted because they don't give anything to be retested. And if it's not able to be tested again, it is not science, right? Because science retests and retests and retests and retests, which is how the theory of race got debunked, which is where we're going with this conversation. So in the beginning, these atrocities needing their justification for the Europeans means that they create these kind of theories in convergence with this idea that certain groups are less evolved than other groups, and that they can distinguish those certain groups based on what is really artistic measures and not on the idea of actual scientific measures, right? And because of that, what you see is that Neanderthal is used early on to try and compare them to darker skinned people, as specifically to people from Africa and people from Australia, as being less intelligent because they the way that Neanderthal was depicted was not using the actual understanding of the Neanderthal's development as well. So they were depicted as being more primitive. And so it was this idea that there's a similarity here. And so certain people are less evolved. This also comes with the original out of Africa theory, believing that people who are European and people who are Asian left Africa at 150,000 years ago and never went back. And in leaving Africa at 150,000 years ago and never going back, they evolved more than people who remained within Africa. Again, these are racist theories that have been debunked. Now, how did we debunk the theory of race? We debunked the theory of race recently with the whole genome project, right? That one? No, that's not true. I know where they got that image. Like I've looked at that image in a few different ways. Anyways, the whole genome project, takes the genes of people, the DNA of people throughout the globe. And in taking the DNA of people in populations, primary populations around the globe, a primary population is a population that has been there continuously for several thousand years, right? This is where they've been. By taking the genetics or the DNA from people in primary populations around the globe, they realized that there's more genetic difference within a primary population than there is between primary populations. Now, if you think about this, this is logical. If you and your next door neighbor had a lot of genes in common, then when your kids got married because they played together as kids and had babies, they'd end up being inbred because gene on gene would meet, and it would cause more genetic mutations, right? It would cause more toxicity. It would cause more problems, right? So having a great genetic diversity in a primary population gives us the ability to not meet gene on gene and mutate. It gives us the ability to evolve in a positive way with the adaptations of the environment. I have frozen again. I will be right back. So because this gives us the ability to have more differences in our genes so we don't mutate our genes or become inbred, this gives us the ability to actually grow healthier, to actually move forward healthier, okay? So when we look at the theory of race, what debunks the theory of race is that there is more genetic difference between primary populations than there is within primary populations. One other thing that really debunks the theory of race is the knowledge that within the Kwe population of South Africa, who you might know as the San as well, both are acceptable terms. The Khoisan is mispronounced by most Europeans, and so it's asked not to be used, but Kwe or San both work. The Kwe population of South Africa actually has it has all the genes. The entire human genome, you can find them all in the Kwe population. Which is an amazing, fascinating thing to me, that you can find all the genes of the entire human genome in a single population. The more people, actually that word is a slur to the people that it would actually apply to, right? And that group of Muslims in the early Islamic period comes from the Arabian Peninsula, the Levant area in North Africa. This group is considered Caucasian by the racist taxonomy that most of us utilize to define groups. And those areas are actually all considered Caucasian in the original taxonomy of the theory of race. That invade the Iberian Peninsula around 700, I think, and are removed from the Iberian Peninsula by the Celts, the Spaniards, who are descendants of Celtic people in that region, by the Spaniards in 1300. Now, I'm not going to say that the removal wasn't as violent as anything else. And I do have to say that Islam actually is way more tolerant of people of other religions in their space than Spanish Inquisition Christianity on every level. And Islam's control of Spain was one where they would tax you more if you were not Muslim, but that was the only thing they would do to you. Whereas the Spanish Christian Empire, the Catholic Spanish Empire, if you were not their religion, or even if you were their religion, but they could trace you back to having recent ancestors who were another religion, they would do some really horrible stuff to you. So I'm not stating that I didn't ask for an apology for anybody. I was just giving information. I'm not going to state that the the Christian removal was a positive thing. It was a reclamation of people who were indigenous to that area, removing their foreign conquerors, though. And it was not the first time that they had to do that. I mean, Rome. That is who that group of people are. They're not what they're often attributed to. Would there be people who were very dark of skin within that group? Absolutely. There would also be people who are very light of skin within that group. It absolutely has nothing to do with anywhere but North Africa, the Levant area, the Arabian Peninsula, and Spain. Those are really the only places that so because they're coming from so many different spaces, they're not usually a specific singular word that can attribute to the entire group. That's not a slur, right? So I would just say that the Islamic group in that time period, that were a part of the Islamic group in that time period, right? Are they powerful Islamic leaders at a time when Islam was Islam has always been a very beautiful religion that was trying to correct issues in a different religion that it kind of originated from, just like that other religion was trying to correct in a different religion than it originated from. Absolutely wonderful people on many levels, right? And like I said, I don't really want to talk about religion in this chat, but of the ones that I mean, not I approve of any of them, but, my level of acceptance really, Islam's on the top of the level of that acceptance of that religious triad. So that's who that would be, right? When we are looking at the other species alongside us, and we had gotten into the concept of how the theory of race was debunked because we were talking about Neanderthal, and Neanderthal being the first species. Neanderthal was actually interacted with as a way to kind of double down on the atrocities, right? Neanderthal, the way they used Neanderthal as being primitive and then equating Neanderthal to certain communities was just really a way of making sure that they could just justify those atrocities a little bit more. The same thing with the original theory of out of Africa, which has been debunked again, and that's the idea that everybody outside left 150,000 years ago. The current understanding, we see that Homo sapiens have a continuous presence in the Arabian Peninsula starting at 150,000 years. And that continuous presence in the Arabian Peninsula started at 150,000 years ago is actually side by side with continuous presence of Neanderthals in the Arabian Peninsula starting at 100,000 years ago. They're actually in two caves about 5 minutes walk from each other, and they actually interact a lot. This is where we see a lot of leaps in our understanding of the world, right? And this is actually where we get a lot of Neanderthal DNA, and why we see Neanderthal DNA in everybody in Africa except for two populations, the Kwai population and the Yoruba population. And those two communities actually have ghost species DNA. So we'll get into them and that ghost species DNA a little bit in a minute, but they do not have Neanderthal. They're the only place on the planet prior to colonization that does not have Neanderthal DNA. So when I say things like this population has Neanderthal DNA, what I'm talking about is prior to colonization. I'm talking about in skeletons 10,000 years ago. I'm talking about in skeletons 8,000 years ago. I'm not talking about in skeletons from yesterday, right? I'm talking about the DNA within populations that pre-exist the current lines or concepts that we have. So we see that this is a time where they have yes, they absolutely found caves in northern Spain that are Neanderthal. No, they've never found Neanderthal in the United States or in Turtle Island or Abial at all. No one ever stated differently. The DNA is there. And I'm telling you right now why the DNA is there. The DNA is there because for 100,000 years we intermixed with the Neanderthals on the Arabian Peninsula. And so in that 100,000 years of mixing with the Neanderthals on the Arabian Peninsula, we take a bunch of that DNA back into Africa. We take a bunch of that, or the Neanderthals actually. So at like 260,000 years ago, we start to see that the Neanderthal Y DNA is a Homo sapien Y DNA, like the chromosome for Y is a Homo sapien chromosome for Y. So actually, we're intermixing with Neanderthals even earlier than this. And we actually see that before that, it's a Denisovan Y DNA because Neanderthal doesn't seem to have a Y chromosome that we can find at least. So for that 100,000 years of intermixing, we get a lot of the Neanderthal DNA. We see that at the end of that 100,000 years, so about 50,000 years ago, is when we see Homo sapiens start to move up. We see some are a little bit earlier. Of course, we know now that Indigenous Australians have been there for 70,000 years as a continuous population. We know now that Turtle Island Indigenous people and Abiyalian Indigenous people have been here or have the genetic break at 54,000 years ago from the rest of Eurasia, even before anybody else was in Europe or Asia. And we know that, or there's a lot of evidence now of a southern boat route around 54,000 years ago through Southeast Eurasia and through the islands of the Pacific, right? And so we know with that, that's why there's only a small amount of Neanderthal DNA here in Turtle Island and Abiyala, because of the fact that the Neanderthal DNA here in Turtle Island and Abiyala comes from that original mixture between 150,000 years ago and 50,000 years ago on the Arabian Peninsula. Right. So Neanderthal DNA is pretty much across the entire planet, again, with the exception of those two communities within Africa that do not have it. And we know that there's more Neanderthal DNA on the planet today than there was during their time as a species whole. They lived for about 600,000 years. And it is not that we killed them off in any level, shape, or form. They went through a couple of near extinction spaces and times in which their community decreased significantly. And it's actually in intermixing with us that they kind of saved themselves, right? As we see that actually many communities will do in colonization, they'll intermix when their community is taken down below a population continue level. They'll intermix to save their population and to save their genetics. The Neanderthals pretty much did that. I don't want to play the savior card. And it's not like that, but we envelop the Neanderthals into us. And by enveloping the Neanderthals into us, we allowed the Neanderthals to live on in our DNA today and to live on as a species much longer than the 600,000 years of their time on this planet as a species whole, which is currently double the time of our time on this planet as a species whole. In fact, triple, because while they see that we start at about 300,000 years ago, they don't figure out, or they don't see us as having a species whole or being a singular species until 125 to 135,000 years ago. So actually like a species whole on this planet for what is that? 3 times the length of time that we've been here, right? So it's not that we killed them off, it's that we enveloped them within us and we made them a part of us and they carried on. We did the same thing with Denisovan, though I'm not going to go to them next. What we're going to go to next on our seven cousin species road is we're going to go to the next one that we found, which we found in 2003. So again, Neanderthal is found in Neander Valley, Neanderthal in the 1850s, right? And for the time period from the 1850s until 2003, I was in Iraq in 2003. I don't remember a whole lot other than that. I think I found out about this in 2004, 2005. And then, when we looked, my entire childhood, Neanderthals have been a fascination. Everybody's fascinated with Neanderthals. We still don't know a whole lot about Neanderthals. 2003 runs around, and here's Homo florensis. Homo florensis is our hobbit species, okay? They're about 3'5" at their height. They're tallest, and they actually have big feet, and they come from the island of Flores in Indonesia. And on the island of Flores in Indonesia, we found a cave that has about 50 specimens from them. The PhD, or the doctorate of anthropology, who has been working on that cave since 2003, actually has recently been told or has heard of recent sightings of Homo florensis by people in the on Flores Island, by indigenous groups on Flores Island up to 50 years ago, or as recently as 50 years ago. So there is some concept or some curiosity that there might actually be a few Homo forensis who have still existed. Our understanding of them is they're roughly about, I think, 100,000 years ago to about 30,000 years ago, though again, we're not sure if they're gone, right? Our understanding of their timeline really all comes from one cave in this island. Now, because Homo forensis is on an island in Indonesia, in what all of my, I don't use books because books get outdated really, really quick. So what I use is current archaeology or anthropology or scientific journal articles. And I use them as sources. So I basically have a compiled bibliography on the website in my profile, nwitaord.com. And this is, just as I explained at the very beginning of the live, a bounce off space for you. You can go and find an article, and then it'll give you a few of the things that I've mentioned, maybe not all of the things, may actually contradict some of the things I've said because something else confirms some of the things I've said, right? Because there's always some disagreement and not everybody has all the information, right? But it'll give you a good jumping off place because we learn best when we're seeking for ourselves, when we're seeking knowledge for ourselves. So there are sources, absolutely. Again, nwitaord.com. It's the website in my bio. Oh, no, I haven't. I don't usually do anything other than humans. Like I'm really focused on human evolution. So with, I mean, I'd like to believe I am, but since you were just making weird comments, I'm just not sure, dude. Right? If I am, I mean, so Homo forensis on the island of Flores in Indonesia is in what we call the Wallace Trench. And the Wallace Trench is basically between two shelves, two land shelves, right? And because it's between two land shelves, I'm doing good. Thank you so much for mentioning, I appreciate that. I'm doing good. It's been a rough couple months, but I'm okay. I'm getting back in my scheme. So because it's between the two continental shelves, right? It's deep and it's never been above sea level, which means that to get to this island in Indonesia, they absolutely had to cross water, right? And when we look at this, we also see something called, we also see something called island dwarfism in action, right? Or insular dwarfism, insular giganticism, island dwarfism, island giganticism. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're saying, Michael. I'm not sure. So island dwarfism and island giganticism states that if you are in a space that is small with not a lot of predators or not a lot of large predators and not a lot of nutrients, that you will shrink to fit that space. So Homo forensis is an example of island dwarfism. They shrunk to fit that space and that place. This is our second cousin that we found. Island giganticism says the exact opposite. It states that if you are in a space that's large and you have large predators and there's an abundance of food, you will grow to mammoth sizes. This is why we have mammoths. This is why we have giant cave bears and giant cats, right? So this is island giganticism or insular giganticism. It also comes with being isolated from the rest of your people or your species and not having a lot of intermix of the genetics, which is why it's island. So if you are and your people, say you and 100 people are trapped on an island for 400 or 500 years without any interaction of outside genetics and the adaptation, you're going to shrink some. Now, adaptations take about 100 generations, so currently about 2,500 years for an adaptation to take full effect. So you'd have to be there a little bit longer. We're probably, and I froze again, 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 and I froze again. And I froze again, and I froze again. So because it takes like 2,500 years, 500 years probably isn't going to do it. You're probably going to need something like, at least a couple thousand years at that point. So we're not seeing that we're going to see like the Sentinelese are not going to have gone through that level of adaptation yet, right? Even though the Sentinelese have been isolated for probably 200 years at this point, right? So absolutely, mamas. My big things are I ask that nobody gets blocked, just muted, unless they're just outright crappy. And then I also ask, like, thank you, Logan. I also ask that we mute for only a few minutes at a time, just so that, if somebody said something that got misinterpreted, or if somebody wasn't trying to be an ass, or if somebody gets muted and sticks around to actually hear the answer, a lot of times they'll actually have some relevant questions afterwards. So I do ask that nobody gets blocked and that people only get muted for a specific amount of time. So, a shorter amount of time, so that they have a chance to actually, if they're trying to ask a real question, to come back and ask again. I don't know if fears are all based on desire. Question is, aren't all fears based on desire in some sense? Maybe. I mean, but I think also fears are based on experience a lot of the time too, right? I would think that maybe phobias are based on desires a little bit more, but fears, I think, sometimes can be based on experience. I mean, most people. So, like we all kind of live in a really fucked up world. So most of us have had some really shitty childhoods. And so most of us have some fears that revolve around those really shitty childhoods. They revolve around the experience, right? If you are living in a time when you're, not living in a city, and there are a lot of predators around, maybe you're afraid of the lion, but you're probably afraid of the lion because you saw somebody get killed, or because somebody told you that the lion was scary. So I don't know. And both of those are, the opposite of both of those is a desire for life, right? A desire for safety. I don't know if it's so much that they're based on the desire, though, or if they're based on the removal of a need, right? Life is not a desire, it's a safety, or it's a need, right? To stay alive is a need. To stay safe is a need. So it might be more that we're looking at fear is based on the removal of need than it's based on desire, right? So homoloforensis coming into the scene at 2003, right? They were important in several levels. First of all, hobbit species. Like, how do you not get that as important, right? It's beautiful. And we're also seeing, like crossing water in homoloforensis, right? And we're also seeing that there's another species on the scene. So after this, we start to see that there's a lot of changes in the understanding of a lot of different things. And one of those is DNA. There's a thing called polymerase chain reaction that was worked out in like the 80s or something. I do not remember the name of the woman who worked it out. But in 2010, Svante Pablo, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize for this, was able to use polymerase chain reaction to sequence ancient DNA. And he did this by being able to get a full genome out of a Neanderthal. Polymerase chain reaction takes what it's working with and it replicates it. So DNA, like every other chemical on this planet, has a shelf life. And while you're alive, DNA is constantly replicating. But the moment you die, the DNA stops replicating. And so once it stops replicating, it actually starts degrading. And this goes into what we call a half-life phase. And a half-life is the amount of time it takes for any chemical to degrade by half. In radiography, I learned about half-life phase because of the fact that radiation and uranium and stuff like that, the degradation of them. Thank you. I appreciate that, Neuro. I can never remember it. So, and for a while I had understood it wrong. And I actually thought it was Svante who invented it and not just adapted it. So like, I want to make sure, but I can never remember it. And I could never remember his until he won the Peace Prize for it. So, and then it was like everywhere. And I was like, oh, that's who that guy is. So The half-life of certain chemicals is, again, the rate, or the half-life of all chemicals is the rate it takes for it to degrade by half. So if your half-life is a day, and say you start out with 100 strands, this is not how DNA degrades. DNA shrinks, it doesn't lose, but it's just the way my mind is computing it. And so this is just the easiest way for me to explain it. I'm going to use small numbers. This is for my brain. So if your DNA is 100 strands and your half-life is a day, then during that first day, you will lose 50 strands of DNA. During your second day, you then lose 25 strands of DNA because you started the day with 50 and you lose half of the 50, leaving you with 25. And your third day, you start the day with 25 and you lose half of that 25, leaving you with 1250. So because of the way that everything degrades, it also has importance in the environment will affect this. So if you are in a cold, dry environment, your DNA will last longer. If you are fully submerged in, I think it's alkali, but I tend to get those two A words confused, might be acidic environment like the bogs, your DNA will last longer. If you are in a hot, wet environment, your DNA will degrade quite a bit faster. So we never were able to get, or have not been able to get, DNA from Homo florensis. We were able to get DNA from Neanderthals, and we were studying the Denisova cave. And in studying the Denisova, that's awesome, Sola. In studying the Denisova cave, we were able to realize from a pinky bone, a phalange, the very tip of a pinky, that there was an entirely different species out there. And this is how we find Homo denisovan in 2010. Now, Homo denisovan is extremely important to us. We see that Homo denisovan DNA is seen in Southeast Asia, in the islands of the South Pacific, in Australia, and Turtle Island indigenous people, and Aboriginal indigenous people. This actually shows a huge root for Turtle Island and Aboriginal indigenous people that had not been looked at before, because of the fact that it's in Southeast Asia. It has nothing to do with North Asia. It's in the islands of the South Pacific, right? And so this is actually where they started to look at the boat route that many indigenous people we knew about. Like, we knew that there was a southern boat route, right? Not just the Kelp Highway. We knew about many different stories of our migrations here, right? So this is where they start to look at that southern boat route for Turtle Island indigenous people and Aboriginal indigenous people. When we're looking at ancient DNA, and Denisovan DNA, this gives us so much impactful information, right? So we see with Denny here, she was also found in Denisova Cave, that she is half Denisovan and half Neanderthal. Her mother was Neanderthal and her father was Denisovan, right? And because of that, we get the ability to see different information about how species are intermixing, right? We know that we're living together. We know more information about this, right? So after Denisovan, we see Homo naledi. If you have not looked into Homo naledi, you need to look into Homo naledi. The Rising Star Caves outside of Johannesburg in South Africa feature Homo naledi, and Lee Berger is the lead archaeologist on the Rising Star Cave excavation. He has done what is called Unknown Cave of Bones on Netflix, and it actually shows Homo naledi. So Homo naledi lives from 235,000 years ago to 335,000 years ago. And in this time period, we're barely alive. We're just coming on, right? Homo naledi shows us, that evolution isn't linear, which DNA studies in Turtle Island and Abya Yala are a little bit more difficult for other reasons too, right? There's so much interaction of other DNA in Turtle Island and Abya Yala because of genocide. And there's also a lot of people who really don't want to give up that DNA because of genocide, right? Because of what's happened, right? So with Naledi, what we see is that Naledi is, and it's showing us that evolution isn't linear. We see that Naledi from its L spine down, its lower spine down, is Homo erectus. It's an expediently bipedal species. It does have a little bit of curvature to its feet, which indicates climbing, but not enough that would stop expedient bipedalism. It also, from its L spine up, or its upper half of its torso, has Australopithecus africanus, Lucy's body. It has the ability to swing from trees. It has the ability to climb. Its shoulder girdle gives it this ability still. Its brain is the same size as Australopithecus africanus or Lucy, but it's shaped the way that only modern humans are shaped. This helped our understanding of the fact that it is the shape of our brain, not the size of our brain, that gives us the malleability of the brain that we have. It gives us the ability to understand things that we have, right? So it has the same shape of its brain capacity as we do. It's called a globular lobal brain. They have the pattern of speech on their skulls, because the patterns for speech are imprinted on the inside of your skulls by the patterns of your brain, right? They buried their dead back in these caves. They're the first burial of dead that we have evidence of. Not only that, but they used torches to crawl through extremely tiny, narrow passageways that Lee actually had to lose a lot of weight to go through, and actually the paleoanthropologists who taught me have been invited to the dig because they're a very small human being, and they were looking for small human beings. They were pregnant at the time, so they couldn't go, but they're a very small human being, and they were looking for small human beings to fit through this 11-inch basically crack. So it's going through and sliding and wiggling your way through this huge crack and climbing over the dragon's back. You can see it if you watch Unknown Cave of Bones. It is a workout to get back there. And it's done all through torchlight. They buried their dead. They carved on the cave walls, and they held ceremonies for their dead. We can see this because in the chambers where their dead are buried, there's no food offerings on the fires that are built in those, but there's the cooking of food on the fires outside of the caves in which they were buried. Netflix. This is Netflix. It's called Unknown Cave of Bones on Netflix. And Lee Berger is the head archaeologist, and this is Homo naledi. If you look up any of those things, naledi is L-E-D N-L-L, nah. N-E-L-A-D-I. I could type it to you, but I can't say it out loud, right? So they are fascinating. And if you watch the show, it honestly looks to me in some of the carvings, it looks like runic carving. Like it looks like writing on the cave walls in there. They also are the first instance of the carving of the hashtag. The hashtag, or the pound sign, is actually one of our oldest. It's actually our oldest, that we see in Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, and it is seen prior to Homo sapiens and Neanderthals in Homo naledi in the carving on cave walls, right? So naledi is fascinating on every level, and this is 2012 in South Africa in the Rising Star Caves. After naledi, we see. Where are we? Hold on one second, please. We've gone through Neanderthal. We've gone through Florensis. We've gone through Denisovan. We've gone through the naledi. The next one we're going to talk about is Homo longi. Now, Homo longi is a skull that was found in the 70s. And currently, right now, they're not sure whether or not Homo longi is actually the brain case of a Denisovan, which we don't have a brain case of. The closest we have is a small patch of the lower skull. Whether or not longi is actually Denisovan, whether or not longi is a completely different species. Longi means long. Longi comes from the Long Cave. It was found in the Long Cave in China. Around the same time, we also see a finding in Luzon in the island of the Philippines, the island of Luzon in the Philippines. And this is Homo luzonensis. Longi, I just don't have any information on really other than longi, right? Homo luzonensis, and these two are so recent for me. They are within the last couple of years, so they're very, very recent information. Homo luzonensis in the island of Luzon in the Philippines is a species that is a dwarf species, 4'8" at their height. My understanding is that they don't have different, like they're not bigger feet, right? Like there's not other things that but they are 4'8" at their height. They're a smaller species. And to date, I haven't gotten a whole lot of information on them. After that, very, very recently, within the last 6 months, Halongdong 6, HLD6 out of Asia came out. And now HLD6 might upend everything we know. HLD6 is 300,000 years ago in Asia. And HLD6 has a flat face and the start of a chin. The chin that we have is a chin that is not seen in any other species. This is the thing that sets us apart from everybody else. We don't know why we have it. We don't know what it's for, but we have what we call the mental eminence. And this is why they call us sapiens sapiens. We are wise because of the fact that we have the mental eminence. And they actually take this from the Statue of David. We're wise. So this mental eminence, the very start of this is seen in HLD6. I have 2 degrees, medicine and radiography, or medicine and archaeology. So HLD6 is showing us the flatter face, and it's showing us just the start. It's not actually the chin yet. It's just the start of a chin, right? But it also has Homo erectus characteristics and Homo neanderthal characteristics. One thing that every other species but us has as well is a gap between the last molar and the curve of the mandible, that jaw curve here, where your teeth come in here. Nobody else has teeth that go all the way back to the curve of the mandible, right? And we do see within HLD6 that HLD6 has that gap. There's the brain case is a little bit lower and elongated. So there's a few different things that show us that this is, we're not sure what this is, right? But it could change everything we look at, right? As we go forward, we'll probably not get DNA from this species. Again, we're looking at a hot, wet environment for the most part. I mean, I'm not exactly sure where HLD6 is, but I do know it's in China, and I don't know if it's in northern or southern China, right? So it could be that we could be in a cold environment. We might get DNA, but from what I was seeing, they haven't gotten any DNA at this point in time, right? I haven't been there, unfortunately. I would love to go. My disabilities are getting worse. Oh. Again, I apologize. Oh, and it's not going to give me my background, is it? Please give me my background. Okay, let's fix that. 1 second, everybody. Enjoy the Mona Lisa for a second. That's not what I wanted. I apologize. I have a hard time with anything technological anyways, and then they change so much stuff on this stuff that it's hard for me to figure out. I know that, I think it's under effects. Yes. Okay, this is going to pause me again just because of the fact that I have to open up my pictures. 1 second. And it's so super slow. It's so nasty how slow this thing is. Oh, come on. Where is it? I'm so sorry. This is just being so stubbornly slow. It is not helping. It's so stubbornly slow. I don't even know if it'll let that happen. Like, it's just. It's so stubbornly slow, like it won't even let me change the back again.
I mean, it should reconfigure it and then just drop me. You know what I mean? Like, just to use me to reset it.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if it. I don't think Gobekli Tepe changes anything really. I think that. Well, okay, so let me take that back. I think that it might change it for some people. Like some people may not have understood that we've been able to interact in that way, like, and that we've been able to build in that way for a long time. But we just recently found out that Homo heidelbergensis, who is a species that we came from, actually, one of the several that we came from because we came out of convergence, still didn't do it. So we just recently figured out that Homo heidelbergensis actually was able to build homes or something. Like they have wooden buildings that are like Lincoln log, like, well, they have a couple of Lincoln log pieces that they've found at 500,000 years ago. They want to say that it's a road, but I would state that it's less. I mean, sure, you can build a road. I mean, but if you're building a road, you're probably building houses too at that point. Like if you're building a road, that's some pretty advanced shit. So we've been using the ability to build for quite some time. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can get this picture back up. I apologize. It will probably, like, I won't be doing anything for a second because of the fact that I actually have to go into my pictures to get to it. But let me see if it'll do it without freezing me out like it was. There we go. That looks a lot better. Haha. Thank you, Atira. That was probably because you popped up and it made it go a lot easier. Absolutely. Don't get me wrong. I think Gobekli Tepe is fascinating, and I think that they are finding a lot of new information out of Gobekli Tepe. I just think that we have this concept that we're different now than we were before. I think that we've had brains this entire time. I think that we've had human interaction this entire time. I think that we can see that in so many different ways when we stop looking at it through a Western lens and start looking at it through an indigenous understanding. When we look at the animistic understanding of species, of all of us before 10,000 years ago, that animistic understanding is very communal and it's very nurturing. And I think that that's probably the biggest difference between us now and us then. That we stopped caring about how things affect everything else, and we only care about how they affect me personally. I think that when we look deeper, we will see that we've been building cities for 100,000 years. We just changed the way we built them when we needed them to be more permanent. I know for a fact that when you look at your phone, it comes because Homo erectus discovered how to manipulate and control fire. It comes because Homo erectus figured out how to put clothing on, right? I don't think it's an advancement. I think you think it's advanced, and it's not advanced. It's actually backwards. Western-based agriculture, monocrop agriculture, is actually destructive to every environment it is put into, except for the Nile when the Nile is not dammed, because the Nile is the only place that refertilizes itself every year. You said, is it a consequence of advancement? I said, I don't think it's advancement. Right? I think that we think it's advanced, but I don't think it's advanced. I think that we have actually de-advanced. Like, I think that so we see with, like, okay, whatever. When we look at Western-based agriculture, we see that monocrop agriculture works along the Nile because the Nile fertilizes itself every year. If you look at Western-based agriculture or monocrop agriculture, it doesn't work anywhere else. What instead works everywhere else is honorable harvest and tending. Tending is an animistic thought process that we all had for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years that we lost when about 10,000, 12,000 years ago, they started taking this monocrop agriculture that was working along the Nile and started using it in other spaces. And when they started utilizing it in other spaces, they went from a really easy, lax life to a very hard Scrabble life, because monocrop agriculture is extremely hard Scrabble, whereas tending, I would disagree with that as well. I think it's a consequence of greed. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think we have plenty of predators. We call them governors and presidents and kings, right? I think we absolutely have predation, but our predators would rather that there's more of us to exploit. Okay? So I don't think of it as advancement. I think of it as actually, as a deterrent or a detriment. I think of it as a detriment, right? And I know that there were vast cities here in Turtle Island. Chattahoochee was 50,000 people, right? The nations of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the people that you would know of as Iroquois today, these groups of people, were looking at huge, huge cities that were part of the forest, right? How many people are in the United States today? Or actually, let me do it as North America. $579 million in 2016. So they estimate that when Europeans arrived, Turtle Island had 100 million people in it. The highest estimate is 100 million. The lowest estimate is like 80. And they were able to feed everybody healthily and happily, right? Now, do I think that we would have to use different techniques to restore the environment? Absolutely. Do I think that we would have to use different techniques to feed more people than we were feeding before? Absolutely. Do I think that anybody can truly return to a life way of 400 or 1,000 or 10,000 years ago? No. Right? I think that there's a lot of different ways that we can intermix the current technology we have with the indigenous ancient knowledges that we have across the globe to make a better life for all of us. Absolutely. Right. But I don't think that those are the reasons that it exists. And you can, absolutely. I have evidence that the reason our society as it is today exists is because of the need of people in charge to keep you in check so that they can hoard. No, I'm talking about the root issue. You're ignoring the root issue. The root issue is there are people in charge who hoard everything and exploit you. And that's been going on for 10,000 years. That's the root issue. But there weren't too many of us then. And we're only at too many of us, in your opinion, now because of the root issue, which is people in charge trying to hoard and exploit you by maintaining their control over you. We don't need leaders. You know that there are vast, vast, vast societies that live for hundreds of thousands of years without leaders. We don't need that, though. Okay, listen, I'm not doing this with you. That's your belief system. Maybe you can stick around and actually learn the truth, or you can take your belief system somewhere else. But we don't need leaders, and I'm not arguing it with you. You're missing the point. I am not. Thank you very much for your time and your argument, but I'm good. I don't want to put forth the work to do it. I've done it 100 times. I was sewing by the time I was 5. I've made all of my own clothes half of my fucking life. I also grew up in a teepee with a dirt floor for a good portion of my life, right? Like I grew up dirt floor poor in the middle of the fucking woods. We built our own house to get out of the teepee, right? So like I have a different childhood than most people, right? And so when I talk about these things, I do talk about these things from personal experience, right? I grew up living like that. I grew up living off of nature. I grew up living off of the land, right? That's how I was raised, right? So do I understand it? Yes, I totally understand it in a way that most people probably don't today, unfortunately. I think more of us do, right? But yeah, no, my mother is a Bronze and Iron Age fiber art specialist who can actually and does and has for the last about 3 decades, has like 60 head of what we call primitive flock sheep. And she gets all of her fiber from those, well, not all of it, because she gets fiber from other places, but she gets the vast majority of her fiber from that. And she knows like Bronze and Iron Age fiber art techniques that she can take it from the sheep to the cloth, to the clothing. Like when I say I've made my own clothes, I mean I've spun the wool and woven the fabric and dyed it with Bronze Age techniques of dyeing and sewed it by hand. When I say I've made my own clothes, do I know how to do those? Yeah, I mean, so HLD6 is the last of our seven cousin species, the 7 species that we see in the archaeological record that live alongside of us. We've only gotten DNA from 2 of those, the 2 that I explained, Denisovan and Neanderthal. And as I explained, a lot of it is because of where they're at. You would think that maybe in Africa, the Homo naledi's would have DNA coming out of them. But unfortunately, that cave is also very damp. And so it's a hot, damp environment. So we're not getting DNA from Homo naledi. We haven't gotten DNA really from anybody else to my knowledge so far. Maybe we've been able to out of HLD6. Maybe we've been able to out of Luzonzensis, and they haven't published on it yet, but to my knowledge so far. This is important when we look at the ghost species. So the 7 ghost species are species that we see little pieces of their DNA in either our DNA or the Neanderthals and Denisovans' DNA, but we haven't been able to find them in the fossil record or their DNA in the fossil record. So like we see little fragments or genes from Neanderthal that affect us today, we see little fragments of another species. It's not ours. It's definitely a Homo species. It comes from the genus Homo, but it is not us, right? In the Kwe population and the Yoruba population, we see 3 of these ghost species. Again, those are the only 2 communities on the planet that don't have Neanderthal DNA, but they do have these 3 ghost species in them. In indigenous Australians, we see one of these ghost species, which actually really correlates to the Moy Hill site that we were talking about before at 120,000 years ago. This would be a descendant of Homo erectus. When Homo sapien arrives in Australia, they probably enveloped this descendant species within them, just like they had Denisovan, just like they had Neanderthal. We also see in Turtle Island indigenous people and Abiyalian indigenous people that they have ghost species as well. So again, this is probably linked to the Cerruti Mastodon site. And again, there are older sites here than the Cerruti Mastodon site. This is evidence of Homo erectus making it to this space and speciating it into another species while they're in this space. And then that would be the ghost species that we see in Turtle Island indigenous people and Abiyalian indigenous people, because when Homo sapien gets here, they again envelop another species within them, just like they had with Neanderthal and Denisovan. We are definitely not out here killing everybody. We're out here fucking everybody because we really like to have sex with things that look different than us. It is only recently that we've had this idea that differences are a bad thing, right? It's only recently, right? And again, these are ghost species. So we don't have a name for them. We don't have a full genome out of them. We don't have a full understanding of them. That's why we call them ghost species. We just have a couple of little fragments of them, their genes within our genes. The other 2, we see one in Neanderthal and Denisovan, and then there was one that was published along with HLD6, but it didn't actually state what community it was in. So it might not actually be, it might actually be in different species, like older species they found in Asia, like Denisovan, or it could be in the present day Asian population, or it could be somewhere else. I don't know. It was published about with HLD6. So this is the 7 ghost species that we see either within our DNA or within Neanderthal and Denisovian DNA. And these are important and impactful in a lot of ways. They give us DNA they give us genes that we don't have in a lot of ways, right? They give us things that we need to actually exist in space sometimes, right? And it also shows part of the migration patterns that we see of Homo sapiens across the planet, right? And the way that Homo sapiens move across the planet. I think it's also really important when we go into the understanding, within the last 2 years, they've published that they now realize, so it would be a descendant species of Homo erectus. It wouldn't be Homo erectus itself. Just like Homo erectus goes to Europe and becomes Heidelbergensis and then Neanderthal, right? Or just like Homo erectus. So Homo erectus is kind of the grandfather of all those cousins that we see in the fossil record, right? And so because Homo erectus is kind of the grandfather of all those cousins, this would be a species. So Homo erectus, say, gets here at like 7,000 or a million years ago. Say Homo erectus gets to Turtle Island a million years ago, right? And they speciate here because it's a little bit harder to get back and forth then, right? And so they speciate here in isolation. I think this is the giants from our stories, but they speciate here in a space that is really big and very large, right? So when Turtle Island indigenous and Aboriginal indigenous people arrive here, they're enveloping that species within them, just like they did in Australia. But it's not Homo erectus themselves. It would be a species that was the descendant of Homo erectus, like evolved from Homo erectus. It probably wouldn't look like Homo erectus. It probably wouldn't, like Surudi Macedon is using Oldowan tools, but some of the older sites that, like, there's art at some of the sites that are older, like 250,000 years ago, there's art here in North America, right? So that site would be something that is probably, that's not a Homo erectus thing. Homo erectus, we've never seen art in Homo erectus, right? So there is no evidence of the giants. That's a personal belief. That's why I stated that beforehand, that I personally believe this is our giants. There is no evidence of giants here currently. There have been finds of giants here. I don't know, right? We don't have access to any of the supposed finds here, right? Well, they would have been here already. Just because we see it 130,000 years ago doesn't mean that's when they arrived, right? Well, and that's the other thing. Giants is 7 to 9 feet tall, right? It's not like we're thinking like 14 feet tall, right? Nobody's ever, and we see giganticism today in people. And we see a history of finds of skeletons that are considered gigantic skeletons that are reported throughout history, right? All the way back to the Greeks. The Greeks reported finds of giants, right? So I think that the flood myths have to do with the oceans rising. I think all of our myths and legends are actually things that can be proven. Like our origin stories are all things that can be proven with science. Like every origin story that I have so far tracked includes some form of the elements of the world around you creating you, right? So whether it's from the elements from the stars, or whether it's from the elements of water, or whether it's from the elements of the earth, or whether it's coming out of caves, or some form of the elements of the earth creating you. And that's absolutely what happened. We absolutely adapted to the biome. We were absolutely created by the planet itself, right? Just like every other species is created. You mean small-brained? Are you asking me? I'm not sure. So we have evidence of smaller brains in other species. Like we were talking about Naledi, right? They have a small brain, though it's shaped like our brain, right? And like Florensis has a small brain, but I wouldn't call those microcephalic because they're the brain that's in proportion to their body size, really. Like it's about that, right? But if you're talking about like what we see within humans, like in Homo sapiens today, most of that comes from chemicals. Most of that comes from issues that we're dealing with today. And I do not know of an early evidence of microcephalism in like a couple hundred years ago or a couple thousand years ago. I haven't seen a find on that, right? Like that does not mean that there's not a find on it. It just means that I have not seen a find on microcephalic people. I mean, I know of microcephalism. I've seen it. Like many of us have seen children affected by it, right? But are not like, I mean, I'm sure some of us have seen it in real life, but like we've all heard reports of microcephalism affecting people in certain communities right now, right? Or like there's a mosquito or something like that its bite can cause a pregnant woman to have a child that is microcephalic or something like that. But I don't know of any archaeological evidence of it personally. And again, Zika, yeah. And again, it doesn't mean that it's not there. It means that I do not have it. I do not know of it. Yes, Zika, and Zika, thank you. And that was absolutely it. How old do I think modern human truly is? So, sapiens, first find currently attributed to sapien is 300,000 years ago in Jebel Irhoud in Morocco. Oh God, I don't remember what number he is. Anyways. And then we have 260,000 years ago in Ethiopia and 260,000 years ago in South Africa. And those are the earliest evidence of sapiens. And what this is people that have a flat face and have a chin. They still have other characteristics that are not just us, right? That they're from other species, right? And this again is because we do come about through convergence. Within the last couple of years, they found out that we come about in a way that they had prior thought was actually theoretical, that didn't actually happen. And this is speciation through convergence. I'm sorry, they're doing a lot of lawn work today. They usually do this on Mondays. Speciation through convergence, what they're seeing is that a tribe is a word it's a Latin word that means a community based on genetic lineage. So your citizenship within the community is based on who you're born to. The tribes of Israel is one of the good examples of this. Israel itself, the state of Israel currently, not a great example itself, but is actually like if you are born an Israeli, if you are born Judaic, if your lineage is Judaic, you're a citizen of Israel, whether you've ever stepped foot in Israel or not, right? You can go there and you can claim citizenship. This is a community based on genetic lineage. A band is the community that is not based on genetic lineage, but on the needs of the community and the needs of the individual. The United States would be a band. It is a community where you can come to and get your citizenship based on it. It's a community where your citizenship is based on being born here, not whether or not your parents are citizens here, right? So this is a difference between community based on, between the word tribe and the word band. When we come about as a species, most humans are living in bands of, you might have a group of Heidelbergensis in this band, and a group of Antecessor in this band, and a group of Erectus in this band, and a group of Ergaster in this, did I already say Ergaster? Maybe not, Ergaster in this band, but a group of several different Homo is the genus, species within this space. And these different Homos that are living together, different Homo species that are living together, are all intermixing and all interbreeding. And because they're all intermixing and all interbreeding, you might have a parent who is half Antecessor and a quarter Erectus and a quarter Ergaster, and another parent that is half Ergaster with a quarter Heidelbergensis and a quarter Erectus. And together they make our very first Homo sapien, right? And our very first Homo sapien looks at their mom and their dad, and their mom and their dad look different, and their grandparents look different, and all their aunties and uncles look different. Everybody around them looks different, right? So when we see this, we see us coming to birth. We're being birthed in bands that are a multitude of different faces, a multitude of different body types, a multitude of differences, right? So we see us coming together in these three, or not coming together, but we see us starting in these three spaces. If we find a skeleton of something, that means that there's probably more, right? Like just one doesn't typically make it. Like you got to have 1,000 to get one kind of thing, you know, just because of the way that the archaeological record is biased, that the earth itself is biased in the way it degrades things. And so we do believe that if we found one, that there's probably more at the same time period. We're just not finding them. But we do see that we found, a few different communities where we start at. they have hypothesized or have decided currently that between 125,000 years ago and 135,000 years ago, we become a singular species, this singular species of Homo sapiens. And what that means is, that we're primarily breeding with each other, though we're still very obviously interbreeding with other species because we're still getting Neanderthal DNA at this point in time. We're still getting DNA from other species at this point in time, right? And so at this point in time, we're already living with Neanderthals on the Arabian Peninsula, right? And because of this, we're seeing that there's that intermix already. We're already seeing that there's others out there. We're already seeing that everybody around us looks different. Nobody looks like us, and this is how we're born. So they state that Homo sapiens becomes a species between 125 to 135,000 years ago. They state that the brain formation that we have today, which is where we go from Homo sapien to Homo sapiens sapiens, Homo sapiens to Homo sapiens sapiens, is about 30 to 40,000 years ago. I personally, through my research, can see this starting before. Thank you, Jay. I appreciate that. Because we're changing our understanding of species. Bento. And these aren't hominids, these are Homo. So hominid is a step up on the taxonomy, right? So hominids would include many others. Currently, we're just talking about the species that fall underneath the genus of Homo. So I think hominid is tribe, if I remember correctly. So it goes like species, genus, and then I think species, genus, family, tribe, right? So species being sapien, Homo being the genus. The next up for our family is actually not hominid, it's hominini, and then hominei, and then hominid, right? So it's up there a bit. So it's not all hominids, right, are able to interbreed. It's actually only the hominids that fall under the genus Homo that are able to interbreed. And what this is because we have a recent common ancestor, the Homo erectus grandparent that I was talking about. And when two species have a recent common ancestor, it means that it's easier for them to intermix. Now, this is concepts that is changing currently because we are seeing that in the wild, we're seeing a lot more of cross-species territory causing a lot more of intermixing. The cross-species polar bear, grizzly bear kind of thing, right? So we are seeing more of this in the wild. It's it is changing a little bit, but that's why, because they categorized. So they're categorizing them as different species based on the entire differences of the body, right? So like Neanderthals are probably our closest to us currently, yet physically they're completely different, really. So we speciate in Africa at a time where there's a lot of sun content, and because there's a lot of sun and not a lot of shade, we speciate with really dark skin, and we speciate actually with tightly coiled hair because it creates this lattice work and this kind of hat or shade that protects our head from the sun beating down on it. And it stops our brain from boiling, like it keeps our brain safe and cool. And the lattice work allows air to flow across our brain pan, our skull, right, to keep us cool, right? And so, and we speciate with darker eyes because dark eyes are really good in a heavy sun content environment. They protect. It's all about melanin per square inch, right? So we all have melanin. Every part of our body has melanin. Our hair color is our melanin. Our eye color is our melanin. Our lip color is our melanin. Some of them are a little bit different types of melanin, but it's all about melanin. And the melanin per square inch is about protection. More than it's about letting things in, it's about keeping things out. And so the higher condension of the melanin per square inch keeps it out, prevents you from overdosing on sun. Now, again, it should never be conceptualized. And having a higher amount of melanin per square inch doesn't mean that you don't get burns, like sunburns. You absolutely sunburn, even if you have a higher melanin per square inch, right? Doesn't mean that you can't get skin cancer. You can absolutely get skin cancer, right? Often in today's modern medical concept, because of the racism within modern medicine, it's not seen until way too late, but you can absolutely get skin cancer with a high level of melanin per square inch. You can absolutely bruise, sunburn, all of it, right? It doesn't stop it. It just helps, right? So in development in an area where we have a high level of sun, we develop with a high level of melanin per square inch in our eyes and on our skin, and we develop with skin or with hair that is able to cool our scalp, right? Cool our brain. The Neanderthals, them at the same time, or before, actually about 300,000 years before, are developing in a space that's really cold and developing in a space that has a lot of forests. And because of this, Neanderthals develop very differently than us. Like we develop with tightly coiled hair that allows our brain to be shaded and cooled, Neanderthals develop with this very wide nostril opening, and their face sticks out in the middle further. And this development means that the nasal passages and the word is escaping my brain right now. All I can think of is conchula, and that's not what it is. Sinuses. The sinuses are further out behind their nose than this, and they get larger amounts of air in the sinuses, but it goes through the sinuses and warms up before it reaches the brain pan. So they develop in a way to warm the air before it gets to their brain, right? They also develop very short and boxy, where we develop very tall and thin. This is because the largest organ on your body is your skin. And the largest organ on your body has many, many different factors of what it does. And one of those things is it both protects you from the cold and protects you from the heat. Less skin will keep the cold from affecting you, will keep the warm in, right? More skin dissipates the heat more, right? So if you develop tall and lean, it's able to dissipate heat, right? If you develop short and tight and squat, you hold that heat, you keep that heat. I mean, as tall as, I don't think we have a height on Jebel Irud. We only have a skull. And I don't think we have a height on the other early ones that I've seen. I would say, not like 6 foot or 7 foot, right? But definitely taller than Neanderthals. Neanderthals are roughly like 5'5", 5'8", right? So definitely taller than Neanderthals, right? But I can't remember like specific height measurements from the earliest of Homo sapiens, to be very honest, right? So when we look at Neanderthals, we do know that they're developing short and squat and muscular, and this keeps their cold, or keeps them from being cold. This keeps their heat in, right? So these are several factors of huge differences in the development. The other one is eyes. We see that the Neanderthals develop with lighter eyes. Now, when we talk about lighter and darker, I want you to understand that we are talking about scales. We are not talking about specifics. So when we're talking about the lighter shades within Neanderthals, it should still be understood that there are very dark Neanderthals as well. And that this lighter shade does not mean that Neanderthals are Northwest European today modern white, right? We're looking at lighter. You're looking at Levant area, the Caucasus Mountains, right? You're looking at lighter. When we're talking about Homo sapiens developing darker, we're talking about the darker scale. We're not talking about everybody developing extremely dark, right? We're talking about a scale, as evidenced in the fact that the Khoi people of South Africa have all the genetics. You can be very light in the Khoi people, right? They have the alleles for light skin. They have the alleles for light eyes, right? So when we're looking at it, it is important to understand that we are talking shades. We're not talking like everybody is this dark and everybody is this light. We're talking about if you have a middle ground, you're a little bit more over here, not all over here, but a little bit more over here, a little bit more over here, right? So lighter eyes are developing with the Neanderthals as well, because of the fact that lighter eyes are actually helpful in a low light environment. If you are in a forest, light eyes actually help you see better in a low light environment, right? Just like dark eyes help you see better in a high light environment. One allows more light in, the light eyes allow more light in, which gives you the ability to see in that environment. Whereas the dark eyes protect from too much light getting in and blinding you, right? So, when we're looking at that, we see that these are very huge differences in the physiology of these two species. And that's why we deem them two different species, right? That difference in the physiology and even within the genetics doesn't mean that we can't intermix, because we both have a parent in Heidelberg. It froze again. I'll be right back.
Everyone is.
Sorry about that. So it does. So as you can see with the physiology of these two different species, we have distinctively different physiology, which is why we are named as two different species. But because of the fact that we actually, like, both of us come out of both Antecessor and Heidelbergensis, right? So Heidelbergensis and Antecessor are descendants of Homo erectus. Sometimes they're categorized as subspecies of Homo erectus. And they're the parent species, or two of the parent species of us, and the parent species of Neanderthal. And because of that, we have what we call a recent common ancestor. And having this recent common ancestor gives us the ability to intermix. Now, again, this is all what we've been thinking for the last 100 years. Some of it is changing. Some of this knowledge is changing right now. Again, the fact that we speciate through convergence is a huge, huge shift in understanding for the scientific community, because until this year, last year, nobody thought that that was possible. We didn't think that it was something that you could do. And now we know that both we speciate through convergence and Homo erectus speciates through convergence, right? And so this is it for now, right? This is what it is right now. It could be something different later, right? It could be something different later. And if it is, I'll probably talk about it, like if we're still here, right? So, no, and that's one thing that is important to get in. So we did debunk the theory of race early on within this chat today, within this live today. The theory of race was debunked when multicultural scientists came together and were able to do the whole genome project by taking DNA from people in primary populations across the globe. A primary population is a population that has lived there for a few thousand years, right? And when they did it, they found out that we have more genetic differences within a primary population than between primary populations. I didn't go into that so deeply earlier, so let me touch on it just a little bit. I'm going to use small numbers like I did with the DNA degradation, just because it's easier for my brain to compute. If the whole genome is 100 genes, and every human on the planet gets 25 genes out of the whole genome, and you live in the Khoi population of South Africa, where we know that all of the genes for the human genome are, you're more likely to be genetically different than your next door neighbor. So you might have genes 1 through 25, and your neighbor might have genes 75 through 100, right? Then you are to be genetically different from somebody in a different population across the globe. So somebody in Sweden might have genes 1 through 25, right? And so they're more genetically similar to you are than your next door neighbor is, which makes a lot of sense when we look at the fact that if two genes meet, it causes mutations a lot. So if you have two of the same gene meeting, a lot of times it will cause a mutation in the transcription. We think of this as inbreeding, right? Not intra, that's a different thing, but inbreeding, right? And so to make sure that there's plenty of genetic diversity within primary populations, there's genetic diversity within primary populations, and you're more genetically diverse within your population than between populations. And this is how they debunk the theory of race. We also know now that things like if you're Black in America, you have more prevalence for heart problems. So it's nothing to do with the color of your skin or being African ancestry. history. It has everything to do with redlining. Just like we know that being indigenous in the United States, having more propensity for diabetes has nothing to do with being indigenous to Turtle Island, and everything to do with commodities, which are heavily processed food, and all the experiments that were done on indigenous children in residential schools that created diabetes within them, right? That causes this problem, right? It has more to do with the issues of the government in place than it has to do with genetics, right? So because of that, they've debunked the theory of race. Now, having cousin species in us, having ghost species in us, should not take us down that path again for moral and ethical reasons first. I mean, in my brain, moral and ethical reasons really comes first. It doesn't. Well, okay, so it makes a difference on what we can eat, yes, but blood type isn't typically just a specific ethnicity. Like you might have higher of blood type in ethnicities, but ABO is in all ethnicities, and like RH factor is across all ethnicities, right? I don't do so. Okay, I'm very mixed. And so I spent my entire childhood studying learning about what had happened to all of my ancestors, right? So I've done a lot of history of Africa, African Americans, or of the history of slavery in the United States. I've studied that a lot as a child. I don't do history so much anymore because history isn't really factual. And I really try and avoid most history of indigenous people or Black people in the United States because most of it's not written from the perspective of the people being written about. I do know quite a bit, but I also I know truths that a lot of but it's not usually something I do a whole lot of focus on, right? Just because of the fact that like most people don't know so much, right? But it's not like, I mean, God, there's places in the South that we're teaching it's voluntarily done, came here for a better life through their own choice, right? Like there's a lot of shit that's just wrong, right? And so I don't, that, and I also, my focus in paleoanthropology is so far ago, and most of my focus is like pretty much everything I focus on is pre-Christianity. So most of my focuses really don't, have a lot on it. That, and I grew up a lot learning about Black history in America and Indigenous history in America from Black and Indigenous people. And so like I have stuff without sources. It's just hard for me. And also like, to be just perfectly blunt, not a lot of people want to hear some of that shit from somebody who looks like me. Doesn't matter if I'm a member of community or not. Right. And so I also try not to, I really try to make sure that all of my steps do no harm first, right? That everything that I do is to walk in grace and love for others, right? And I don't want to do things that might cause even the briefest moment of what the fuck, sometimes just because. I didn't say that. First of all, we're all melanated. And I never said that at all. And see, that's one of the reasons I don't talk about Black history in the United States, right? Because then it becomes like one of these things. So no, I didn't say that at all. I talked about African history in the United States, but that does not necessarily mean that Africans are the only people that would be labeled as Black who have history in the United States. Black is a label, right? That I mean, a label that I respect in many ways because it's attributed by a people themselves to take back power, right? Yet again, a label that doesn't encompass all that it should, right? My sister is Australian. She's definitely melanated, right? Um, but my grandmother was African and she was definitely melanated too. So like, and I absolutely talked about indigenous people in Turtle Island who are absolutely not, I mean, absolutely melanated, but absolutely not what you mean when you say melanated, because I do know what you mean by melanated, right? Like, so, so we are at 2 hours. I do try and make sure that I limit myself to 2 hours for my own mental health. So, and like I was saying before, for anybody who's been around for a while, I know I've been gone for a couple minutes. I'm going to try and be back in a little bit more. It's been really hard, but I'm feeling a little bit more of a pickup. It's just been a tough couple months. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be back in more. Hopefully you'll see me the end of the week, right? I also have a kid home in the summer, so it's a little bit harder. There's just a lot of different things. All of that said, I like to end my lives with something. And so we're going to go ahead and do that. Okay. Haplogroup. Haplogroup has to do with your X chromosome or your Y chromosome. And it just traces your ancestry through your X or your Y chromosome, basically. And the way that it comes to you on your X chromosome is a mix. So like, the X chromosome is going to be a mix of both of your mother's X's, and it's not like a 50-50 mix. It could be a 75-20 mix, 25 mix, and all of her X's are a mix. The father passes down an intact X and he passes down an intact Y. And then the mother mixes those two X's together, right? And so that's how it kind of passes down genetically to trace genetics a little bit. But haplogroup has to do with your X or Y chromosome, which is like 1 out of the 23 pairs that you have. So we didn't get a whole lot of talk today about the fact that we're biologically nurturing and communal. So let me go ahead and touch on that really quickly. Biologically, as a species, we know scientifically that we're nurturing and communal, and we know this from a couple of factors. One of those factors is the fact that biologically, we have to have assistance to give birth to our children. It has to do with the shape of the head and the shape of the shoulders being at a cross purpose from each other, and the shape of the birth canal. So the birth canal is like this, and it's tilted like this. And your head is like this, and your shoulders are like this, but your head is like this, and your shoulders is like this. So our babies start with the nose facing backwards, and they require 2 turns to get through the birth passage. One to make sure that their head is sideways coming through there, and another one to make sure that their shoulders are sideways coming through there. And then they're born with their nose up, right? We're the only species alive today that has mandatory midwifery, and the only other species that ever did was Homo neanderthal. Mandatory midwifery means that we must have assistance in giving birth to our children. This means we must have another person there, a community, to give birth to our child. We have more brain development stages. You can trace through a mother's or father's mother's line, but not a father's father's line. Only a son can trace his father's line back. Only a son can trace the male line back through DNA. A daughter can trace the female line back through DNA. Through those chromosome DNAs, there's other, like autosomal DNA doesn't use those chromosomes. It uses all of your chromosomes. So you can trace it through autosomal DNA no matter who you are. So we must have community to give birth to our children. We also have something called, everybody has life stages, all the animals on the planet. We have more life stages between brain development stages between neonate, firstborn, and fully formed brain adult, which is currently 25 years. And those brain development stages are extremely important to the way our brain works, the malleability of our brain. And because we have extended stages of brain development, we need extended nurturing during those stages more than any other species on the planet. And we need a nurturing in a variety of understandings so that we can meet the variety of knowledges that our brain needs to develop. right? We also must have that nurturing because we know, due to studies done in the 50s and 60s called the failure to thrive studies, where they took orphans and put them in two different rooms. And in one room, they gave them attention. And in the other room, they propped up their bottles and didn't touch them any more than they had to. And those in the room that weren't touched ended up dying. And those in the room that were touched ended up thriving. So we know from things like the failure to thrive studies that not having the nurturing of somebody as you're growing actually affects brain development and will actually like kill you. Like, you can eat and you can get your diaper changed and you're not laying in filth, but you must have that physical touch, that interaction with somebody else for your brain to develop, for you to learn. Right. So because we have these extended periods of brain development, and each of these periods of brain development, most animals can fully take care of them. Most animals are having babies before you're in preschool, right? Same age, right? Most animals are able to reproduce before you've gone to kindergarten, right? Before you're able to feed yourself, most animals are able to reproduce on their own, right? So because we have these timelines that are so extended, right? They're fine. Just leave them. I don't think they were trying to be. Oh, somebody else. Never mind. Okay. When we look at this, we see that biologically we must have nurture and we must have community. It actually, they've done studies recently that takes about 30 people in a community to raise a child from neonate to adult, from firstborn to adult. And as we're looking at earlier times, we must have at least that many, right? Because not only do we have to have somebody who is maintaining the child not dying all day long, but we have to have several people out hunting and a few people out gathering. And if several people out getting water, because those out gathering berries and those out hunting, they have protection of other people. If you're going down the water and there's hippos in that water, or crocodiles, or there's lions that meet at that water, you're going to make sure there's 2 or 3 people to watch your back. You need a community of several different people to actually provide for the community. So you're going to need a community of several different people to raise a child. So biologically, we are nurturing and communal. We live in a time, in a society, and we didn't talk about this as much today because we talked about early humans. We live in a time in a society where you're taught that being nurturing and communal is a bad thing, where you're taught that loving behavior is hateful behavior, that hateful behavior is loving behavior. You're taught to hate your neighbor. You're taught that nobody has a village. Nobody has a village. Nobody has a village anymore. And because we are taught not only not to have a village, but that we don't need the village, most of us are depressed. Most of us are anxious. Most of us are aware there's a problem. And because I didn't block anybody, and if you are here talking, you weren't blocked. And so because we live in a space where we are taught that our biological needs of nurture or community are in fact problems, most of us know that there's a problem. Most of us, you're talking so you weren't blocked. You might have gotten muted because you were rude, and you're being rude now by continuing to ask the question when it's been responded to when I'm trying to say something. But you obviously weren't blocked because you're opening your mouth and it's seen. So stop asking, try listening. Maybe it was the problem to start with. When we live in a society that teaches us I'm still here.
I literally just joined an
Oh, fuck off.
I literally just joined a new
It just ended the whole live. I don't know. I hit the wrong button and it just ended the whole friggin' thing. I'm so sorry. I came back in and it hit the wrong button and it just ended the whole friggin' thing. Let me try and make sure that I have people back here. And I'll pick up in just a second. I just want to make sure that I'm giving everybody a chance to come back in, since it went all sideways on me. Thank you for the gift. I appreciate that. Give me just a couple of minutes. Again, I just want to make sure that I can get everybody back in here before I finish, because it went sideways on me. I don't know if we're naturally monogamous. I don't see any evidence for the idea that we're naturally monogamous. I see actually a lot of evidence that we are actually non-monogamous. I mean, I'll freely admit, though, that could also be like me looking for confirmation bias, because I've never been monogamous. I think monogamy is ridiculous. But I haven't seen any evidence that ancient humans were more monogamous than polyamorous, or more polyamorous than monogamous. Okay, let me go ahead. So as I was trying to say, biologically, we are nurturing and communal. Biologically, we need community, and we need to be nurtured. We need to be taken care of, love. We need love, right? It's actually an extremely important factor. And we live in a society that teaches us that love is hate, and that hate is love, that you shouldn't feed the houseless, that they're the problem, instead of the fact that they've been exploited by the government to the point that they can't be exploited anymore. And so, now they're living on, without what we consider a home, right? So with that, being biologically nurturing and communal, and living in a time and a space where we're taught that things that we need are actually things that we don't need, and taught that hateful behavior is positive behavior, that, narcissistic behavior is positive behavior. Many of us are dealing with depression and anxiety, and many of us are dealing with this understanding that there's a problem, but we don't know what the problem is. So we're trying to internalize ourselves as the problem, right? And I just need you all to know today that you are not the problem, that if you're aware that there's a problem, you are in fact part of the solution. And that because we are biologically nurturing and communal, because those are base needs for life, every single one of you does not have to do anything to be worthy of life. You don't have to be worthy of love. You are worthy of love, compassion, empathy, shelter, food, just by breathing. Just by breathing, you are worthy of love. Just by breathing, you are worthy of compassion. Just by breathing, you are worthy of nurture and community. You do not have to be exploitable to anybody to be worthy of the basic needs of humanity, right? Just by breathing, you are worthy. And because I didn't say that at any point of time, in fact, I frequently and have at several times pointed out the exact opposite. Because of the fact that we live in a space and a time where most of us are not getting our base needs met, where we're taught that love is hate and that hate is love, right? Because of that, it's very difficult for many of us. And I just want you to know that you're seen, that you are loved. I know that there have been a lot of times in my life where I really felt like I wasn't loved. And yet when I talk to people afterwards or look back, there are always people around me who actually do love me, right? And I know it sounds trite to many people. I truly love humans for humans. Truly love you just because you're here, just because you breathe, just because you exist. I love you more because you're trying to effect change, because you realize that there's something wrong, because you want to help other people. Thank you, Atira. But you are loved, not but. And you are loved. You are loved. And we are all loved. Right? And you are worthy of love just by breathing. Never mind the extremely tall child in the background. And I want you to know that today. We're currently living in a society that is problematic for all of us. We're currently being taught that it's your next door neighbor that's the problem, that people are trying to take from you constantly. And in nowhere in this are we being taught the truth, which is the fact that it's not your next door neighbor that's the problem. It's the people in charge who are exploiting you for everything you've got until they dump you on the streets and call you houseless, taking everything you are until they can dump you out. It is teaching us that relationships are transactional. It is teaching us that possession is a positive, right? Living in a space that rejects the idea of community, but teaches you that you should own everything, but you should take from everybody, right? And you're not the problem. I just want you to know that today. You're not the problem. And if you see the problem, you're a part of the solution. There is a solution. Land back on a global scale to Indigenous communities. Indigenous communities, given tending and governance on a global scale, return us to a communal community, like to the idea of communal communities. When Europeans arrive in Turtle Island, we see that the Indigenous communities here in Turtle Island didn't have orphans. Their elders weren't starving. Everybody and a member of a community was all important, and so everybody was taken care of, interacted with. So returning governance means that we get back to a sense of community. Returning tending of the earth means that we reverse the climate destruction that monocrop agriculture has caused. Means that we reverse the climate destruction that modern big business causes. And if we can reverse the climate destruction as a species, we might actually survive and might actually be able to live past the expiration date that we've kind of set for ourselves as we're trying to off ourselves, right? So returning of tending and governance to Indigenous people across the globe. There are Indigenous communities across this globe. There are Indigenous communities in Scandinavia. There are Indigenous communities in the UK. There are Indigenous communities in Japan. There are Indigenous communities in Russia. There are Indigenous communities in Africa. There are Indigenous communities in Australia. There's Indigenous communities in the islands. There's Indigenous communities in Abya. There's Indigenous communities in Turtle Island. There are Indigenous communities across the globe. And if we return tending and governance to Indigenous communities across the globe, we understand the interactions with the land in a way and in a space and in a time that will reverse climate destruction and possibly save our species as a whole. And the idea of community together and working together actually solves that pain that you're feeling, the depression and that anxiety and that understanding that there is a problem, but you don't quite know what the problem is, so you think it's yourself. I'm here to tell you today, you are not the problem. If you're aware of the problem, you are a part of the solution. Permaculture is an appropriation of Indigenous agriculture. And I truly believe that if we can mix millennia of knowing of Indigenous tending and interaction with the land with some of the modern technology that we have, that we can absolutely support every single human being on this planet. Not only can we provide nurturing for every human being on this planet, like food for every human being on this planet, but we can actually provide housing for every individual on this planet. There are ways to do these things. We just have to step up and be willing and stop allowing the exploitation of the hierarchical government that's keeping you in check and teaching you that it's your neighbor instead of them that's trying to steal from you, right? So that is my it for today. We'll try and be back within a couple of days and we'll talk some more on paleoanthropology, the rise of violence, the different things across the globe that have led us to where we're at today and why race theory has been debunked, why and how. All of these things are important and they matter in the global understanding of us as human beings. Much love. Take care of yourself. And if nobody has given you love and compassion today, please make sure you give yourself love and compassion because we deserve it just by breathing. We are worthy of it just by breathing. And if nobody else in this world today is taking care of you, please take care of yourself, because you deserve love and compassion and empathy. Much love. Sorry, Oki, it is over on YouTube. If you haven't gotten to watch it, it is over on YouTube. Take care, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll try and be back later this week. Apparently, I can end the TikTok live when I don't want to end the TikTok live, but I can't end it when I want to end it. Thank you, guys. Have a great day. Take care.